2024 was a great year for the UFC where a lot of amazing fights were put on. Today we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 fights of 2024. Remember, this is my opinion. There is no right list. This is strictly just my opinion. Also, fair warning, Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje will not be on this list, as I based this list off competitive fights that were back and forth and we saw action from both guys. In that fight, it was really one-way traffic, and until the knockout, it was all Max. So for those reasons, fights like that won't be on this list. Max definitely had the best knockout of the year, but in terms of fights overall, it doesn't compare to the ones on this list. These fights were all great in their own way. Without further ado, let's get into it, starting with number 10. Number 10, Petr Yan versus Davidson Figueiredo. This was a clash of two beasts in the bantamweight division. Davidson Figueiredo went on a tear at 135 before his fight with Petr Yan, and Petr Yan earlier this year picked up a nice victory over Song Yadong. I was super excited for this fight, and it definitely delivered in the UFC Macau main event. Both of these guys went back and forth, and although I think Petr Yan actually probably won all 5 rounds, all the rounds were competitive, and Figueiredo definitely had his moments. There was high levels of grappling, high levels of striking in this fight, and you could finally see Petr Yan come back to his own. Both of these guys are incredible. This was an incredible fight, and I feel like this had to be on the list. Yes, it wasn't a bloodbath by any means, but this was just a very high-level fight with two very high-level athletes, and that's why it earned the spot at number 10. Number 9, Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. This was another title defense for Islam Makhachev, and this time he was taken on the diamond. A lot of people going into this matchup felt that Islam was a step ahead of Dustin and would wipe the floor with him. And while Islam did find success and did dominate most of the rounds, Dustin still lasted a lot longer than many people expected, including me. He surprised me a lot in this fight. I think his dirty boxing was really effective. He was able to rip at the body of Islam, caught him upstairs a couple times, and overall his takedown defense was pretty good, and a lot of the exchanges on the ground were good. He was able to cut Islam open with an elbow, and we hadn't really seen that before, so that made it even better. I think overall Islam was the better fighter on the night and definitely dominated Dustin for a majority of it, but Dustin definitely had his moments, and there was actually points in this fight where you felt that Dustin actually had a chance, and against Islam's other opponents, you can't really say the same thing. I think this was a great fight. I think both guys left it all out there, and that was Dustin's last chance at getting a title in the UFC, and he didn't, but he put on a hell of a fight, and he really showed everybody that he is still one of the best at lightweight. Number 8, Alexander Rakic versus Yuri Prochazka. This was a great fight at UFC 300 that I think went a little bit under the radar, and this probably was a fight you weren't expecting to see on this list, but after recently rewatching this one, this definitely had to make my list. I mean, this was such a great fight, and in that first round, Alexander Rakic was having his way. He was ripping Yuri's legs apart. You could just see the swelling on Yuri's legs. Also, he was winning a lot of the exchanges in general, but every time Yuri landed a shot, you felt like it was the more powerful one. And heading into the second round, I was getting a little bit worried for Yuri because I noticed that Rakic was beating up at his legs and he was still finding success upstairs. But Yuri, in that second round, cracked him with the right hand, and it was the beginning of the end. Rakic started wobbling around the cage, and he ended up falling to the ground where Yuri picked up a TKO finish. But that fight was all action for as long as it lasted. Yeah, it wasn't the longest fight, but it lasted for a while, and both guys showed a ton of success and showed their power. Great fight, great addition to UFC 300, and overall, it just had to be on my list. Number 7, Alex Pereira versus Khalil Rountree. If you told me that this fight would make a top 10 list at the beginning of the year, I probably wouldn't have believed you, but this fight was an absolute barn burner, and Khalil Rountree put up a great fight against the champion Alex Pereira. We've seen in a lot of Pereira's fights, and even in this year, he was very dominant. Against Jamal Hill, he picked up a knockout. Against Yuri Prochazka, he picked up a knockout. And he did the same to Khalil Rountree, but it was much tougher. In the early rounds, Khalil was really finding success on the feet, landing some straight shots, and he was giving Alex a lot of trouble. But eventually, Poaton's power just ended up being too much. In that fourth round, Khalil's face was absolutely mangled, and Poaton just ripped him apart. I mean, that sequence towards the end where he got the finish is amazing. You really see Alex just enter into that flow state, dodging punches, landing his own. He looked incredible, and it capped off an amazing fight where both guys had success. Yeah, in the end, Khalil's face was absolutely destroyed, and Pereira, he looked somewhat unscathed, but don't have it wrong. Khalil Roundtree put up a great fight, and he did a lot of damage to a guy like Alex Pereira. It wasn't expected, but it definitely deserved to be on this list because it was an incredible fight. Number 6, Charles Oliveira versus Armen Tsarukyan. Similar to the Figgy and Yan entry, this fight is on this list because of how high level it was. Yes, it wasn't exactly a bloodbath, but it was a super competitive matchup against high level guys. And when you have high level guys like this put on a show like that, I just love it even more because this is the absolute best of the best in the world, and they're not throwing haymakers, they're not just trying to put the other guy's lights out, they're trying to tactically break the dude down and pick up a finish, and that's exactly what both of these guys tried to do. Charles Oliveira in that first round, he landed a nice low kick which dropped Armen Tsarukyan, and then Oliveira, and right away he attacked the neck and secured a pretty tight guillotine. I mean, most of the guys would have gone to sleep to that, but not Armen Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan managed to get out, yeah, because his shorts were falling off, and that definitely helped him, but either way, he got out of it and then did his own work. That was a really competitive round, but I gave it to Charles. Second round rolled around, it was all Armen Tsarukyan. He found success on the feet, landed a nice axe kick, and controlled Charles on the ground for the entirety of the round pretty much. Round 3 rolled around, it was very competitive, and Armen dominated most of the round, but then Charles secured a Darce choke towards the end and almost got the finish. It was really close, but it wasn't enough. Either way, I really enjoyed this fight. I found it super competitive and super high level, and I feel like this fight deserves to be on this list because of that, because you can never really see number one contenders go out like that. They fight a lot more conservative, but both of these guys, they had their foot on the gas and they were both hunting for the finish. Great fight, and definitely deserve to be on this list. Number 5, Shawn Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis. Some of you were probably expecting the other middleweight title fight to be on this list, Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. However, I enjoyed this fight a lot more, and I think this is one of the more underrated fights of the year. People do give it its credit, but after rewatching it, I mean, these guys went to absolute war. They were throwing back and forth. Every round was competitive, and it doesn't matter who you thought won the fight. What you can't argue is that it was very competitive from both sides. Personally, I had a 3-2 Dricus. I think the judges got it right, but I could definitely see the argument for Shawn. Shawn was very effective on the feet. We know what Strickland's game plan is, and it always works pretty well. But Dricus, he's such an awkward fighter that it almost makes him impossible to fight because of how unique his style is. And he used everything he had in his toolbox in that fight. He was throwing kicks, he was throwing punches, he was able to level change a few times and create some ground control, and overall it was just a great back and forth matchup that showcased both guys' true capabilities of mixed martial arts. I think it was a great fight, great title fight, and I'm excited to see what Dricus and Shawn do in 2025. I mean, they have the rematch, so that'll be very interesting to see how that one goes. Hopefully it's as good as this fight was, but yeah, great title fight and had to be on this list. Number 4, Drew Dober versus Gene Silva. When this fight was first announced, I was super excited because I knew it was going to be a clash of two absolute brawlers, and I knew those guys were going to leave it all out there, and that's exactly what they did at UFC Denver. Gene Silva was honestly finding a lot of success in this fight. Drew had his moments, but overall it was a pretty dominant performance from Gene Silva. But just from what we saw in that fight, it had to be on this list. I mean, Drew Dober's eye was literally like hanging off. Gene Silva absolutely mangled him, and Dober still had his moments. I mean, when Dober lands, it's very powerful, and Gene Silva felt that at times in this fight. However, Gene Silva's elbows and just his unique striking won him this fight, and it was in high fashion. I mean, literally look at Drew Dober's eye. It's completely mangled. That was all Gene Silva. Landed beautiful spinning elbows, and it was just a great fight back and forth. The fans loved it. I loved it. And Gene Silva, I mean, he's one of the brightest prospects in the UFC. I think he's going to do big things in 2025, and this fight proved that. Great fight, had to be on this list. Number 3, Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway. When this fight was announced, I knew it was going to be a banger, and it was easily my most anticipated fight of the year. You have Ilia Topuria and Max Holloway, two of the best boxers in the UFC. There's just no way this fight was going to be bad, and it absolutely delivered. I mean, both guys had their success in this fight. I think it was a battle of power versus speed and technique, and that's exactly what we saw. I mean, Ilia Topuria, his boxing is next level. In my opinion, it's the best in the UFC. He's so crisp, he's so powerful, and he's just so good. And then you have Max Holloway, of course, who's no slouch himself, a great striker, but he just couldn't hang with Topuria in this matchup. I mean, Max had his success in this fight, don't get me wrong. He was able to keep Ilia at bay, and he controlled a lot of the striking exchanges, but once Ilia was able to hit him and actually crack him, it was pretty much over for Max. I mean, those first and second rounds, I mean, you could argue that it went to Max, but that third round was all Toria. Toria landed that straight right, and that started to wobble Max, and that was the beginning of the end. Toria had him up against the fence, was landing body shots, shots to the head, and then eventually he finished it off with a nice left hook that caught Max flush on the chin, and he became the first guy to knock out Max Holloway. This fight wasn't long, it wasn't a bloodbath, but it was an incredible fight between two high-level boxers, and that's why I loved it so much. And for me, it was easily one of the best fights of the year. Number 2, Matias Recki versus Makhachev Orbl. Now, this fight is not one I expected to be on this list, but I mean, if you have not seen this fight, you need to go and watch it right now, because this is mixed martial arts at its peak. And I've been using the word bloodbath a lot in this video, and how not a lot of them have been. This was a bloodbath. I mean, Makhachev Orbl, I've never seen a dude take that much punishment and still stay in a fight. Recki was cracking him with everything, sat him down, was beating on his face. I mean, Orbl's face was an actual mess, and he was still able to fight back in this fight and land shots of his own. It was a great back and forth the entire time it lasted, and I enjoyed this fight so much. And when I saw it, I was like, yeah, this is definitely going to be the fight of the year, but there is still one above it. Either way though, this fight was incredible. I mean, this is mixed martial arts at its peak. If you have a buddy who's not into the UFC, go and show him this fight and let me know what they think, because I don't know how anybody could not fall in love with the sport after watching a fight like this. Two warriors, two guys that aren't big names whatsoever, but they're fighting for something more. They're hungry, they want to become a name, they want to grow in the UFC, and they want to grow their names. And by having a fight like this, that's exactly how it happens. Great fight from both guys, but there is still one fight that I think was a little bit better than this one. Number 1, Daniel Zellhuber versus Esteban Ribovich. A lot of you guys were probably expecting this fight to be on this list, but maybe not number 1. But for me, this is absolutely the fight of the year. It's a striker's delight. Both of these guys went at it, and went at it hard for 3 rounds, and nobody took their foot off the gas. In that first round, Zellhuber was having a little bit more success. He was keeping Esteban at bay, landing punches, landing kicks, and overall controlled the tempo of the fight. But Esteban was still landing shots of his own, and they were both going back and forth, both having a high volume, and like I said, they didn't take their foot off the gas. In that second round, these guys went at it again, both landing crazy stuff, just crazy kicks, crazy punches, and it was just an absolute war. But then the third round came around, and I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this. Esteban Ribovich landed a shot on Zellhuber, dropped him, and then Zellhuber was able to get back up, and Esteban was just teeing off on him. I think he might have landed like 30 punches in that blitz, honestly. You saw Zellhuber wobble, you saw him try and run away, and the ref didn't stop the fight for whatever reason, which I'm happy he didn't, but in the moment, you kind of would have understood. But he didn't stop the fight, and Zellhuber was able to fight back and start doing damage on Ribovich. I kind of agree with the decision. I would have been okay if it went to Zellhuber, but either way, it was such a competitive fight that I honestly don't even care. Both of these guys deserve to have their hand raised for such an incredible performance, and it's honestly has to be the fight of the year for me, because it was 2 unexpected guys and they put on an absolute striking clinic at UFC Noche. So there you guys have it. Those are my top 10 fights of 2024. Let me know if you guys agree with me in the comments. Also, drop some of your favorite fights of the year. There's definitely fights I forgot on this list too, but let me know down below. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Also, let me know if you agree with my list or if you disagree. Let's have a discussion. This is a very tough list to make, so I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you all for watching this video. Check out more videos just like this one as we wrap up 2024, and I'll see you all in the next one.